Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our SubQuery customer interview series. Today, I am pleased to be joined by one of our leading Cosmos customers, a big team in Cosmos that is doing a lot of work across the interchain. And I'm joined by Sen Comm from White Whale. Welcome, Sen Comm. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction, James. I'm doing great, and I'm pleased to be here with you today.
It's a pleasure to have you. And why don't we start by telling the community about White Whale? What is White Whale? What do you guys do in Cosmos? Yeah.
I'll try to cut it short. So Whiteville originally comes from Terra Classic, but after the collapse, we decided to not run away, but continue building, and that's what we did. So we had the chance to completely, revamp our business model, take a step back, and look at what's happening, and we saw that this whole interchain thing and cross-chain, that's gonna rock, that's gonna take off. So we doubled down on that. So we built the first and still leading cross-chain DEX and flash loan provider. We're live on, I think, 7 or 8 chains by now. We have our own blockchain, Migaloo, which is a permissionless CosmWasm chain. We have validation services. We validate, I think, more than a dozen blockchains, securing over 8 figures in assets. And we're also providing multiple open source MEV solutions, so arbitrage bot, liquidation bots. We have a very vibrant community around that, and that's also very nice. And lately, we've been starting to really build out a builders ecosystem. We have 2 programs to facilitate that, Ride and Sail, and we've seen multiple blockchains and almost half a dozen of teams join these programs to build with us together.
Well, I hope you get a chance to sleep in between all of those things that you do in the space. It's interesting about your background with Terra Classic. We kind of had a similar start in Cosmos and Interchain, where we announced our support. We'd been working on supporting Terra for some time before, but we announced our support for supporting Terra on the day that their troubles really began, which was perfect timing for SubQuery. But it's also really good to see that even though there was a large number of developers in the Terra Classic ecosystem that got impacted by those issues quite significantly in some of those cases, a lot of teams just picked themselves up and kept building across Cosmos. And it was really interesting to see how resilient the Cosmos community is after that.
True. So, of course, there have been some, bad sheeps or black sheeps that decided to rug or disappear, but a lot of prominent teams continued building. TFM, Kujira, Ares Protocol, Backbone Labs, Whiteville, obviously. So that's really cool, and I think the Terra Classic or the Terra Collapse was really interesting from an on-chain perspective. I don't know if you guys had the free time to dig a little bit into the last, couple of thousand blocks on the chain, the last, 3 or 4 days. It's really interesting to see what happens, and also how resilient the tech stack actually is, because contrary to most people's belief, the blockchain pretty much worked fine. I mean, there was this custom module with the mint and burn and the economic implications that eventually led to the downfall. But the blockchain itself, it continued to produce blocks, and the blocks were filled, I think, up to 10,000 transactions per block. So that was quite interesting to see unfolding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But out of the ashes rise a whole heap of new chains, and of course, you're building, various DeFi services across all of these chains. That must provide some challenges for you guys in terms of the amount of chains that you support and the complexity of supporting these. What is your long-term goal in terms of number of chains, and how do you get around these challenges?
All of them. That's really the goal. Drive the
Easy
cost.
goal to say, yeah.
Yeah, drive the costs and drive the cost of deployment down, streamline the process as much as possible, and then get as much market share as you can. That's really the goal. And you're right, building cross-chain is a huge challenge. So we started doing this over a year ago. So I think the collapse was back in May. We started working like a week after on our cross-chain stuff. And, around this time, we actually did the first mainnet deployments. So that's over a year now. And by now, there have been, multiple projects, seeing, getting the idea, okay, maybe cross-chain is a cool thing. So I started building two. Some of them are live on maybe 3 or 4 chains. But actually building that amount of non-trivial applications cross-chain with a lot of, back-end stuff, indexing. You need to process the data. You need a lot of smart contracts. You need liquidity. You need all these different things in place to actually have the product cross-chain. That's really challenging, and it continues to be one of our greatest challenges. And sometimes when something breaks, I get in a bad mood and I say, there's one thing that always breaks, and that's kind of everything, because nothing ever works.
And never the right time.
Yeah, it's never the right time, and everything always breaks. Sometimes it's the wallet, sometimes it's the nodes. And if you go cross-chain, it multiplies that feeling. But yeah, that's just very emotional response. But more reasonable answer is that since the technologies are sometimes or most of the times quite new with what we're dealing here from the whole stack. You build your application, you have nodes, you have indexing, you have the blockchain itself, you have wallets, different packages you use for your front end, the smart contracts. All of these things are still new and not 100% matured. So there's a lot of smaller-ish bugs, but if you combine all of them together, there's always something surfacing left and right, and then multiply that cross-chain, so something always breaks.
It's very true.
Yeah.
And I know the challenges in terms of also, if you're working in just a single chain, it's very easy to monitor like a hawk what's going on in that chain. And as soon as something happens, people start talking about things in some channels or whatever, you can be aware of that because it's only one chain you have to monitor. But when you have 5 or 10, or in our case, 80 chains, it's very difficult to keep an eye on what's not working, what is working. And sometimes you rely on people to kind of tell you, hey, this one's over here.
It is, exactly. So we have our app, and there's a drop-down menu where can you select your chain. So I want to interact with the app on Juno. Now I want to interact with the app on, I don't know, Terra or Injective. So there's just a drop-down menu. And yeah, sometimes people ping us, hey, why is this data on this chain not there? Why is this wallet on that chain not working? And it's like, oh my God. But I always say, if things were as easy as uploading a video on YouTube, then there's no opportunity because it's already matured, it's already done. So there is opportunity in this chaos, and we're trying to streamline everything as good as possible. And I think one of the things that SubQuery has been doing decently well is allowing us to replicate our indexing for different chains quite easily. So this hosted service you offer is, we had some initial things there, for complete frankness, and you can cut this out if you want, I don't care. But your support has been quite well, customer-wise. So we've been able to iron this out, and ever since the indexing really works very reliable and usually is not the breaking point. And that's a great thing, out of this whole tech stack and all these dependencies, having one thing that's not breaking, it's great.
It's one less thing to worry about at night.
Exactly. It sounds pessimistic, but that's exactly what it is.
And when you add these new chains, right, the process of updating your SubQuery project to add support for that new zone is very quick for you guys, right?
Yeah, I mean the code is more or less the same, usually. So we just have to host a new instance and get new configuration files in there. So that's quite convenient. I think there's still room for improvement. On a side note, I think having some cross-chain indexer. So you have one instance that, does a lot of chains, would be an improvement because it allows you to even more simplify the management and maybe even do GraphQL queries with different chains together. It would be quite neat without having an intermediary backend. But still, I think that's one of the more smoother parts of our tech stack right now. Closely related to that, something that makes the indexer break, but it's not really your fault, is the problem of getting reliable nodes in the Cosmos. So just this morning, I had a conversation with somebody who was conducting some kind of survey to get feedback on what can be improved with the Cosmos tech stack and whatnot. I said, please, we need reliable infrastructure for apps, so we don't have to build archive nodes for 10 different chains. That's not our work. We don't want to do that.
We hear that a lot as well. And when we go to index and use Zone and Cosmos, finding reliable archive nodes that do have the history is quite difficult. So I'm happy I share that challenge with another team. In terms of at the moment you're focusing mostly on your exchange and your aggregation of liquidity, and also of your flash loan products. Is there more products on the roadmap for White Whale in terms of things you wanted to build?
No, that's the short answer. Not for White Whale, because back in the days when we started this, there was White Whale, the app, and the validation services and the cross-chain bots, but the bots don't need indexing, and the validators don't need indexing as well. I mean, they need monitoring, but not indexing. But we now have the chain, since more for around 6 months, and now our goal shifted a little bit to obviously expanding cross-chain with what we have, but also building up our ecosystem. So I don't necessarily see more products for White Whale coming, but I see a lot of different products for our ecosystem coming. From NFT marketplaces to games, prediction markets, bootstrapping and launch pads, those kind of things.
So your kind of long-term goal is to build these fundamental building blocks and these data sets that other people can build on top of.
I see you did your homework. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I usually say. So we're building, think of it a little bit like application as a service. So you launch a new chain and the chain is empty. That's how you launch a chain, it's empty. But there are certain pieces, I call them core primitives or basic building blocks that you need to just provide the bare minimum. And that includes DEX, flash loans, liquid staking, lending, borrowing, NFT marketplace. You need this. And that it's not revolutionary apps. It's not particularly exciting apps, but this is the base layer. And then you can start building interesting and exciting applications on top, like prediction markets and some leveraged things or games. So, but to get these basic building blocks, you need to usually spend a lot of money to hire devs, to hire contractors, to do it in-house. It takes a lot of time. I mean, look at, without talking, bad about any of the existing Cosmos chains, Godspeed to them. But Neutron still doesn't have a NFT marketplace, as far as I know. And really, the basic stuff's still missing. So they could do all this themselves, or just come to us, hey, please ship all these battle-tested and existing applications, and we can do this. That's kind of...
I guess that's the benefit of the interchain sharing a lot of the code between these different zones, is that you can ship these battle-tested products in a new zone far quicker than they can build their own custom version.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also, that applies to indexing with SubQuery as well. It's been our model as well. Why build your own indexer on your own zone when we've built one that works 95% of what's required across all the zones?
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. In terms of where you're positioning Whitewell, and I kind of agree with it, right? Like it still does feel like for us building in this space that, and you touched on this before at the start, we're like, it's quite hard to build in this industry and things break all the time. And it's a very untested and brand new technology that still hasn't quite gone through, it's not as easy as building a upload a video to YouTube kind of situation. And so there's definitely that kind of, we're going through that phase now where there's a bunch of teams trying to build these building blocks. And then the next phase coming through means maybe other teams using these building blocks to then build more complex things on top of them. If you look at the way the internet's derived these days, there are hundreds of different stacks, and different like protocols and different, tools and services behind your internet browser. And there's like my favorite XKCD comic, which has like all of these different pieces relying on one service maintained by one individual contributor that has been updated in 10 years,
Yeah.
I feel like
meme. It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
No, you're 100% right.
Yeah. And so Whitewell, the future for Whitewell is be improving what you have right now, but also expanding to all the different zones. And there's so many zones, right? Every week I hear of a new Cosmos zone. That seems to be the hot new thing right now of creating a new Cosmos zone.
Yeah, surprisingly, there's still a lot of activity. Although we're in the bear market, I think there's still a lot of developer activity, which is good. And
it seems like it's people are quite digging, like believing in this app chain approach, right? That we're seeing Cosmos pioneer. You've got Polkadot doing it as well. Avalanche trying a little bit with their subnets, and Polygon even starting it with their supernets. But definitely Cosmos seems to be one of the leaders in the space on the app chains.
100%. And so it's hard to say, there's so many different factors deciding who's going to win the, app chain race. I think Cosmos is in a good position because it's a mature stack, or it has matured to a certain degree that other, stacks, cannot claim. So in that sense, I think the Cosmos is in a decent position. And I think it's also a given that, this app chain vision will, hold true in the future. I think it's not going to be like most people imagine, is that there's, a great distribution, TVL spread over 1,000 chains. I think still, there will be one, maybe two chains that capture a majority of the activity, but there will be a lot of chains next to it, and these chains, they can innovate much faster, much rapidly. So you have this, standard business thing where you have a big, huge giant like Apple, and they move slow as hell. And then you have, thousands and hundreds of thousands of startups and small companies around it. They innovate much faster. And if something very useful comes out of it, the giant just swallows it up. I think that's likely solution, I believe, for the Web3 world.
Yeah, well, it's kind of called the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of traffic or 80% of value or 80% of TVL accrues to 20% of the participants, and it's kind of tried and tested and proven to work in both nature, but also in science and technology, and in politics and human psychology.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the app chain vision, it's going to hold true in the future. And talking about 80-20, just going back to SubQuery here real quick, I think, at least from my experience, most users who want to index data, they really just need a small part of the actual functionality. They just want to index some very, very simple things. And our challenge is actually not, functionalities, missing functionalities. It's more about orchestration, management, maintenance, reducing overhead in managing your instances and expanding them. So I think we actually just used like 20% of the features, and we'd like to reduce the amount of work we do for this. Like, especially if you go cross-chain with multiple apps, and just a thought here on 80/20.
Yeah, and that's something that we've been working on in our recent roadmaps, is giving tools and focusing on the first onboarding, because you're right, 80% of the customers only use 20% of the features. So making it very easy to discover and access and use those 20% of features quickly, and don't make it hard. Don't make someone or require people to learn the rest of them to get what they need to be, get the data that they need. And so we've been focusing on that a lot. Hey, Sen Comm, I always ask this question at the end, and I'm curious to hear what your feedback is. Like, you've been in the space for some time. If you were to revisit yourself or someone else that was just thinking about getting started into crypto Web3, and was maybe deciding back at the time to like leave their corporate job in Web2 and go to Web3, what would be your advice to that person?
In 2023?
Yeah, in 2023.
In 2023, advice to that person. That's a good question. What would I tell him? So in 2023, I think it's more or less decided that crypto is gonna stay. But a couple of years ago, it was still is this just a meme coin? Shitcoin casino? Is this something more serious? So there was a real risk to future, to career in just making the step into this startup, cutting edge technology field. So that was a little bit frightening. But looking back, just do it. If you like what you're doing, just do it. And there is enough room for talent. It's a global market. You will find something.
It's a lot more busy. It's not as easy as building an upload to YouTube kind of product.
No,
but it's a fun intellectual challenge.
Yeah, certainly.
Sen Comm, thank you very much for your time today. I really enjoyed talking to you about the interchain, about White Whale, about what you guys are doing, and thank you very much for joining us. So have the rest of your day. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Well, James, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see the video online.
Cheers, man.